Good afternoon, Reflect Festival. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this fireside chat with Bryan Johnson, founder and CEO of Kernel, a company building brain-computer interface called Kernel Flow. Previously, Bryan founded an online payments system and company called Braintree, which he sold to PayPal back in 2013. Today is a special day for Reflect Festival, as the founders and the team behind Reflect conference, they were inspired by Bryan's thoughts on future literacy. And here we are now in LA to connect the dots. So it's great to meet you in person, and thanks for inviting us to your offices at Kernel.
Thank you for coming over.
Yeah. So my first question is, what is future of literacy? What should we understand under that, and why is it important?
If you can't read and write, you can still tell and listen to stories. If you can't plan for the future, you will end up dead.
And why do you think that Kernel Flow and the device, it's an essential part of the future literacy?
After I sold Braintree Venmo, my primary focus was contemplating what one thing I could do in the world that would have the largest impact. And I spent a few years reading voraciously and speaking to everyone I could talk to about what to do and why. And most people, of course, are familiar with the things that are pressing in the world: climate change, and nation-state conflict, and terrorism, and social upheaval, and automation, similar and familiar topics. And as I looked at those various things, I thought one thing they all have in common is the brain. It's humans making decisions about this or that. You know, we don't have a climate change problem, we have a human brain problem. And I wondered, if it really comes back to the human brain, what could be done? And I came upon the idea that if we could build an interface that was actually scalable to measure the brain, then it would be possible we'd enter an era of data enlightenment, that we might be able to understand ourselves and each other with more granularity, which might help us make better decisions individually and collectively.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's one of the operating systems that hasn't been upgraded in a while.
That's correct.
And so basically this device will allow us to understand our brain better. Can you tell us a little bit more of what this device is capable of doing?
At the fundamental level, it's all about measurement. Most people think about brain interfaces as something that's used to text or to control a cursor or change a channel or manage a drone. In the way I was looking at it, it's really about measurement. And if you think about measurement just as a broad topic, we perform hundreds of measurements every minute. Right now, you and I are measuring the loudness of our voice. I'm measuring the grip on the cup and the bringing to my lips. We perform all these measurements that allow us to function on a daily basis. We also do so with our health. And the one thing we can't, we can measure distant stars, we can measure calories, we can measure steps, we can measure sleep. One of the only things in the known universe we cannot measure on a regular basis is our brain, our minds, the things that makes us us. And so the idea was, if we could build the technology to actually bring brain measurement mainstream and global, then it would introduce an entirely new economy of insights based upon this brain measurement.
What are the data points that actually are collecting? So it's a device that collects the data, but what is the data set about?
We each have roughly 100 billion neurons, and as we do our various activities in life, these neurons fire electrically and chemically. And as they fire, neurons ask for oxygen, which then our body delivers. And so this device is measuring basically blood oxygenation. And so as the oxygen is delivered to neurons and is used, it's measuring that. And so it's a proxy to neuron activity. It's what fMRI measures. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what are the applications, right? Like in the iPhone or like phone, right? It's a device, it's an interface where you can build applications on, or what are your applications on the kind of the brain device, brain-computer interface?
Yeah. Measurement as a system would feed almost anything. So if you pose the question, I'm building learning software to teach children how to blank. Measurement of the learning efficacy of that individual and the program is relevant to that contemplation. A person wants to use psychedelics for mental health. The same is true. You would want to measure before, during, and after for a baseline. Basically, anything you do in life, having neural measurement to understand your contextual place will be helpful to provide a more personalized and precise action.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned mental health. It's a big topic in society, and a very important one. Somewhat not spoken about enough. So what are basically the solutions, or how can kernel flow help us to understand these issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful to put this in context of maybe the level of insanity of the way we address mental health today. So imagine if you went to the doctor, the cardiologist, and you said, "All right, doctor, I'd like to know the health of my heart." And the cardiologist then replied, "Okay, tell me first, how does your heart feel?" And you respond, "Okay." But you would also want an EKG, a blood panel, blood pressure taken. You'd want a series of tests done with measurement. You wouldn't want the doctor to say, "Hey, you know what? Based upon how you told me you feel, here's a bottle of statins, like go take them at home until you feel okay." We would consider that to be insane, but that's what we do with our brains today. We sit in a chair, we try to assess how we feel, and then we're given a bottle of something and we take it, or other modalities. And if we could baseline this in measurement, we might be able to bring some sanity to the way in which we even diagnose and address mental health and wellness.
Yeah, I guess also for the research purposes, having these kind of big data sets to kind of catalyze the research in the mental health segment. So yeah, very, very on point. So the big topic is, and across the tech world, is the data privacy. You'll be collecting a lot of data, a bunch of data that could be misused as well. So what do you think about data privacy overall and data privacy in terms of the kernel devices?
We've taken a very strong stand in doing this. We have, there's two fundamental principles driving how we deal with data. One is individual control and individual consent. So any time somebody puts on an interface, they do both those things. They consent to it, and then they have control of their data. And with that pillar as a foundation, in the foundation, we think that really sets the stage for how neural data can become something we trust, something that we rely upon, and something that is used for our benefit, not for our detriment. And that's largely what's happened over the past couple decades with the rise of the internet and technology, is that data has been gathered about us not for our benefit, but for the corporation's benefit. And we want to change that. If you think about, a lot of people talk about this device as a mind-reading device, and they frame it as something that is novel, that hasn't been done before. But if you think about it, Google is doing mind reading when they autocomplete your search or your email, and Netflix is reading your mind when they suggest movies, and Spotify, etc. We just don't frame it as mind reading. And so, as I think there's a quote in the movie Unusual Suspects where the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was believing humanity didn't exist. And they have been doing mind reading for decades. And it's almost like the Matrix, where they read your mind and then they keep you in their algorithm. You don't realize you're in the algorithm, but you are. We are trying to be the red pill, in that we would like to bring truth to neural measurement and then throw up interference for those who are trying to nudge you to do things that may not be in your best interest. And so it's a fundamentally different approach to an individual than what has been done.
Yeah. And it's also one of the missing pieces of the kind of the data points about yourself, right? I mean, Facebook and all these companies have different variety of data points, but this is the one they cannot get. Very interesting. So one of the opportunities that you are discovering at Kernel is to partner up with other companies that are, experimenting in this field, with mind. And one thing that comes to my mind is the psychedelics field. In January of this year, you announced the partnership with Saibin. So could you maybe tell us a little bit more about what you expect from this partnership and what are the opportunities in the psychedelics field or segment?
Yeah, the interest from the psychedelics community generally has been among the most significant we've seen across any industry. And it's sensible because these companies are trying to bring these molecules to a market to address certain mental health and wellness needs. And right now, they primarily rely upon subjective reporting. So how did you feel? And we know that subjective reporting is not great, to be kind to it. And so to stabilize the effects of psychedelics and the potential benefits, it would be incredibly helpful for the entire industry if we could measure the effects. It would bring a level of rigor, it would bring a level of scientific validity that I think would help accelerate the adoption, if in fact they are proven to be efficacious. So we think it's extremely promising. We are excited that it's hit a mainstream area of focus, that neuroscience can come out of the lab and out of the basement from tomb-like structures and beyond people's heads, and to have real-life consequences, real-life benefits to what we encounter on a daily basis.
Maybe could you tell us more concretely about the partnership? Like, what are maybe the projects you'll be working on, or what kind of maybe psychedelics you will be applied to?
An announcement is forthcoming.
Oh, it's forthcoming.
Yeah.
All right. Understood. Good. So I have a quote here. You once said that you're making brain measurement mainstream. So one could say that you're creating equations that represent what it means to be human. Mm-hmm. So how has your own view evolved, and basically what humanity is, or what humanity will be in the future?
Mm-hmm. In history, when we used equations to represent certain phenomena, for example, the motion of the stars, or chemical reactions, or thermodynamics, or gravity, we level up as a civilization. This mathematical modeling. And so far, the brain has not been able to be mathematically modeled. We've not been able to understand ourselves through numbers. We understand ourselves through subjective experience, through theory of mind, looking at each other, through language, but they're all crude approximations of what is really going on. And we know the disconnect oftentimes between what we feel and what's really happening. And so, yes, I think that would be one of the more significant revolutions to happen for the human race, is if we could understand the mind and brain through numbers, through equations. And perhaps there's going to be a Galileo of the brain that will help us understand. And it could be one of the most liberating and revolutionary steps that we could imagine. Because once you convert those into numbers, you basically introduce human cognition into the formal discipline of engineering. So for example, if I buy an appliance somewhere, I don't have to go measure my door and wonder whether it's going to fit through. I just know that society has built engineering standards that it's going to allow a normal appliance through the door, because we have numbers on these things. And the same as my car is going to fit in between the lanes when I drive it. It's not going to bump on the sides. And so you can imagine the world we could build with our cognition if our cognition really became a formal engineering practice. It's one of the things that gets me most excited. It bridges to health and wellness, it bridges to relationships, to politics, economics, to every facet of our lives.
It's very fascinating. Like, you're opening up a new market of opportunities just by quantifying the brain, to understand the brain via numbers. That's very inspiring.
Yeah, science begins with numbers.
Yeah, physics, chemistry, you can all describe that in numbers, zeros and ones.
Yeah, imagine a world we lived where we had to explain gravity with words. Yeah. That'd be tough. Yeah. And same with thermodynamics and the motion of the stars. We know those primitive times. Yeah.
So actually, it's very crucial to understand this, and for the future to be future literate, it has to be done, essentially. So, yeah. And how do you see the coexistence of humanity and the technology? There are a lot of discussions about AI, being the bad cop, good cop in the relationship. So how do you see our coexistence with technology in the near future?
I like the quote that a lie makes its way around the world before the truth gets its boots on. And the same is true with fear. Fear makes itself around the world, travels around the world before reason can get its boots on. And this fear narrative around AI, I think, is actually quite detrimental. It certainly is appropriate that we have caution in the things we're building and doing. It's certainly uniquely powerful. It's also the case that humans have a history of being fearful of things that are new, that are unfamiliar. And so this is not new. We've done this hundreds of times with new arrivals of new things. So it's absolutely expected that this would be the case. I think more fundamentally, I think we're jealous of AI, not necessarily fearful. And jealousy is fear of losing something you have. Envy is wanting something you don't have. And I think we have jealousy of AI. And importantly, the story of AI, I think why it paralyzes some people, is that the story is AI is going to take away everything we do, everything we are, everything we're good at. It's going to take our identity, and we're going to be left with nothing. That's a bleak story. Oftentimes, when we're in life, when we're faced with a situation where we have to leave something behind, we can do so if we have something to look forward to. And we have yet to identify the most captivating and aspiration-worthy endeavor of our generation, which is to aspire to a future of existence that exceeds our imagination. Every generation looks on the horizon of possibilities and they say, what could feasibly be done if we gave this our very best effort? We can't guarantee it, but it's possible. In the 60s, it was going to the moon. Right? And at one point, it was flying a plane across the Atlantic, Amelia Earhart solo, first woman to do it. And if we say right now in 2021, if we look out at the horizon and we say, what is the most audacious thing we can imagine? It would be evolving ourselves past our current form into something else that is unrecognizable. That has not been identified. We don't talk about it. We haven't oriented ourselves towards that. And without that aspirational goal, the fear of AI taking everything away from us, we have nowhere else to go. And so, of course, we're going to feel empty, and we're going to want to feel lugubrious.
Many entrepreneurs look at, what is the innovations, like going to Mars or, these kind of outside of the earth, goals. But you kind of trying to solve the problem that is within us, and humanity, our brain, the most powerful organ that we have in our bodies. So what is your opinion about, putting innovative capital actually into projects that are, putting us maybe to different planets, but, not serving our own bodies, or, we have so much space to upgrade, within ourselves. So what do you think about that?
For me, it's difficult to identify anything more fundamental than the human brain at this point in time. I mean, what's building AI? The human brain. What's contemplating how we respond to climate change? The human brain. It is the thing currently, which is the architect of intelligence and the architect of our future. And I just don't know what could be have higher possibilities than actually better understanding ourselves, having consistent and reliable measurement, and building systems in society that allow us to not only solve the problems directly in front of us that are posing imminent threats, but to allow us to raise up, look at the horizon and say, we can aspire to something so grand that no previous generation could ever aspire to. They didn't have the tools and technology. We do. This is unique to our moment right now.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, you are also involved in different technologies, and you're an investor in via OS Fund. So what are other technologies you're excited about, outside of kernel?
Again, after I sold Braintree Venmo, I did two things. One is I started a venture fund called OS Fund, and the objective there was that just as we have progressed in being proficient at programming software on computers over the past couple of decades, and we now have millions and millions of people around the world who can program software, and it builds all of society around us, we need to have that same kind of fluency with the ability to read and write the fundamental elements that make up our existence. So biology and atoms, molecules, organisms. And so I began investing in companies that would represent the promise of these fundamental abilities of reading and write the elements that make Earth, us, and everything around us. And I made a few investments. One just went public last week, Ginkgo Bioworks. I was, thank you very much. Yeah, they debuted, I think it was one of the largest SPACs ever. I think almost 16 billion. And I was very early in there in a critical time, and I believed in the team, and they were absolutely believe-worthy. They have done remarkable things. And so that's a good example. And now, they're in their public debut, they said they had a quote of something like, the world will not be extracted, mined, or something, it will be grown. And their belief is, we can program biology to solve some major problems. And so many of those investments worked out. And it was also a trial period where prior to doing this, I had no scientific training. And I wondered, could someone like myself get in the game of investing in companies in deep tech? And could I do well? And the answer turned out to be yes. And so, of course, my team is wonderful, and we had some very talented people. But it's the case that I think people with resources, even if they don't have the necessary training, can in fact get involved in addressing these very big problems directly.
Right, Bryan. So we are at the Reflect Festival, and the audience is listening to us right now. So maybe what is the message you would like to convey to the audience that should inspire the future generations to focus on probably deep tech or the technologies that will change the humanity to better?
I guess in my limited self-awareness, I survey what I can, and it seems to me that we have an opportunity that no generation of intelligent life has ever had, where we can aspire to a future of existence that exceeds our imagination by orders of magnitude that we just can't comprehend. And there's this opportunity for us to wake up, to be sober in our thought, and to realize that the systems of the world today, the motivations and the goals we're told to have, and the social norms, have us staring immediately in front of our face and not at this longer time horizon. And that it would just be a tragedy if we didn't recognize the specialness of our opportunity for each of us to do what we can on this. I think if there's intelligent life still around in the year 2500, and they have some document of history, that they would look back at this time in the early 21st century and say, they got it. They figured it out. They saw the point on the horizon. They got themselves along that path, and they were able to bridge into this new possibility. I mean, if back to the question on the AI fear, it's also relative. It's in a relative perspective. Like, could we really level up civilization to a degree that people look back and say, "Oh, like what a petty concern. They were worried about AI. Like, how silly is that? Like, they were all just like folding over in the fetal position." And saying that it's all over. They didn't see this bigger opportunity. And so I think really it's getting our priorities straight, opening our eyes, and aspiring to the things which hopefully future intelligent life will be appreciative that we saw it. We didn't miss the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm sure Kernel will be one of the, I would say, critical points in the future for the humanity, and one of the first interfaces that will be able to measure and collect the data on our brain activities and cognitive activities. So, also thank you for building, such projects and to be brave enough to invest also into deep tech technologies, because this is something that will evolve us in the future. So, Bryan, thank you very much for inviting us to your offices to be here with you in person in LA, even during the COVID times, but we managed to get in here. And Reflect Festival, stay tuned and see you soon.